AI can generate an application in a weekend, but can you take that application, put it on a blank Linux server, connect it to a domain, secure it, and keep it alive? If the answer is no, I think there's one thing every developer should do at least once: self-host a real application. And when I say self-hosting, I don't mean installing a Jellyfin on an old computer and connecting it through a Tailscale. I've done that too, but that's kind of home labbing. It's a level 2 and a story for another video. When I say self-host, I mean rent a VPS, put a real application on it, and make it publicly accessible through a real domain. I recently did this again, and after almost 6 years, and I had forgotten how frustrating, educational, and incredibly satisfying it could be. 6 years ago, we would spin up a DigitalOcean droplet, install everything manually, run applications on different port, and configure Apache or Nginx as an reverse proxy. I remember writing custom rewrite rules for extensionless routing and deploying application without Docker. It wasn't convenient, but you understood what happened after someone typed your domain. DNS resolved it. The firewall accepted that connection. Nginx routed the request and your application processed it. The database returned the data, and you didn't just draw those boxes in system design interview. You had configured them yourself. Then Varsil, Railway, Supabase, Neon, and other managed platforms made deployment incredibly easy. And that is a good thing. I use these platforms and I love them. Sometimes I also hate them because I had side projects scattered everywhere. Some were on Varsil, one was on DigitalOcean app platform, two used Supabase, although I later removed one. Several used Neon, and my static sites would sit on Cloudflare pages. The strange part was that these products didn't have any users yet. I wasn't paying for traffic. I was paying for the possibility of traffic. I paid Supabase so an inactive project wouldn't be paused. Then I paid extra for a custom domain because I treat these projects as a potential production products, not disposable weekend builds. DigitalOcean app platform had its own fixed monthly cost. Varsil's free hobby plan is great for personal project, but a commercial SaaS pushes you towards the pro. And then I tried Aurora serverless Postgres on Amazon RDS. I didn't want the first user to wait for a sleeping database, so I kept the minimum capacity at 0.5 ACU. That removed the cold start, but in my configuration, the practical minimum bill crossed $50 a month for one database with no users. That is the early stage SaaS trap. Scale to zero and your first user waits. Keep everything warm, you pay to keep an empty room ready. Every service was solving a genuine problem, but together, I was running a production grade infrastructure for products without production grade traffic. So I asked myself, until one of these projects get real users, why not run them on one server? And let me tell you, that sent me down the VPS rabbit hole. I started with Hetzner, but many of the cheaper options I wanted were sold out. I ordered a root server from Netcup and also signed up for Kimsufi, but identity verification was going to take another day or two, maybe 3 days in my case because it was weekend. Normally I would have waited, but I have been participating in multiple hackathons and trying to level up my skills, and the current one was the OpenAI Build Week. And also I participated in a shipathon, which is by a hackathon by a revenue cat. And I had to finish this application and the deadlines are right around the corner. And one weekend to build a stable deployment setup is enough. And I didn't want to configure a temporary server and repeat everything 3 days later. So I chose Hostinger. Not because it is the absolute cheapest or the most powerful option, but because it offered the most balanced machine I could start with immediately. I'm paying roughly around 6,000 rupees a month, which is about $70 because I chose the monthly plan. A longer commitment would have reduced the effective cost to around 3,000 a month after taxes, but that required paying up more upfront, and I didn't have the budget. For 6,000, I received 8 vCPUs, 32 gigs of RAM, 400 gigs of NVMe storage, and 32 terabytes of bandwidth. For comparison, a similarly spec'd general purpose machine on DigitalOcean cost more than $250 a month. So I wasn't buying a cheap place to dump side projects. I was buying a breathing room. And when this server arrived, all I had was an IP address, a username, and a blank Linux machine. I added the SSH key and verified it before disabling the password login, configured UWF, updated the operating system, and also added a swap for memory spikes and created a DNS record so I could access the machine through a subdomain instead of remembering the another IP address. This all sounded like a boring task, but every command turned this anonymous machine into your machine. And also, SSHing into the machine with your subdomain, it was an absolute dopamine hit. I didn't manually recreate an old Nginx setup this time. I installed Coolify, connected GitHub, and deployed the Next.js application through Dockerfiles. And reason for using Dockerfiles is that Coolify uses Nginx build, which has its own quirks. So Dockerfiles were much more stable and much more reproducible. Now, I have the convenience of Git-based deployment, but I can still see what lives underneath it. I can inspect the containers, ports, memory, logs, and even environment variables. The abstraction still exists, but it is an abstraction I control. I also moved my portfolio from rahulbharti.dev on DigitalOcean to rahulbharti.com on this server. I configured the domain, issued the certificate, redirected the Apex domain to www. That also reminds you the DNS points a domain towards an infrastructure, but the actual redirect happens at the HTTP or reverse proxy layer. It sounds like trivia until your redirection stops. Then comes the biggest surprise. The application were incredibly fast. All my domains go through the Cloudflare, so eligible static assets can be cached closer to the user while the VPS handles the dynamic request. There was also no sleeping application, no code functions, and no database waiting to wake up. From my location in India, some of the API responses were completing in under 10 milliseconds. In some of the tests, this experience felt instant, and with this machine, I could do much more than just host a few Next.js applications. I can run PostgreSQL, Redis background workers, queues, WebSockets, scheduling jobs, monitoring tools, and staging environment without buying another service. I can even self-host Supabase. Its recommended resources for small to medium self-hosted workload live comfortably within this server. That could significantly reduce my combined backend cost, but it transfers the responsibility to me. I must handle updates, monitoring, secrets, backups, and restoration. That is a central trade-off. Managed platforms don't charge only for CPU or memory. You are paying them to handle operational problems for you. On your own server, you get freedom and predictable cost, but the problems become yours. Now, the 400 gigabytes NVMe drive can serve a meaningful amount of early image and video content, but I wouldn't keep that the only copy there. I can use local drive for databases, thumbnail caches, temporary processing, while putting the durable user uploads in Cloudflare R2 and keeping encrypted backups away from the server. Could this machine run Instagram at Instagram scale? Obviously not. Could it run an Instagram style product through its meaningful first stage with media in object storage and static assets on a CDN? Absolutely. 10,000 registered user is realistic for many sensible workloads. 10,000 concurrent user uploading video is a completely different problem. The honest capacity answer is always it depends. But I now have enough headroom to discover the real bottlenecks from the real traffic instead of designing an expensive architecture for an imaginary scale. And when of these products gets a genuine traction, I can move the containers to dedicated bare metals, probably through Kim Sufi or Hetzner. That gives me more consistent compute, more storage flexibility, and even greater control. But that is for the future. Right now, this VPS is the current middle ground. And also, self-host is still a love-hate relationship. When container consumes all the memory, you hate it. When DNS refuses to cooperate, you hate it. When the server fails, there is nobody else to blame. And when everything is running, domain resolving, certificates working, deployment automatic, and application responding instantly, you absolutely love it. I may not have FANG written in my bio, but I understand what happens between someone typing my domain and seeing my application. Not just theoretically. I have touched every moving part on that path. If you can't afford a VPS, run Docker on an old computer and expose a temporary application through Cloudflare tunnel. You don't need to abandon Varcel. You don't need to reject Supabase. You don't need to self-host forever. Just do it once, because AI can generate your application, your Docker files, and even the server commands. But this server will expose what you actually understand. And once you know what the deployment button is hiding, you become much better at deciding when the button is worth paying for.